All right, here we go. Another cooking video, here we go. Okay, hold on. Back in February, when I was making my way from Asia to Portugal, I had an extended layover in Dubai. My friend Hadil, she recommended that I go check out this one restaurant which offered this really great breakfast. They were right along Jumeirah Beach, and they offered this one Syrian breakfast. It was just so out of this world for me. It was a food experience that I haven't had before, and the spread and the amount of food was enough to feed a family. Now, the star of that breakfast was the shakshuka. This dish originates from the Northern African region, and in the Middle East they have their version as well. And so the Syrian version I've had was called jazmaz, and it was one of my favorite meals I had on my entire trip. And this dish is so simple to make. It's really a celebration of two major ingredients, and that is tomatoes and eggs. Now, I've never actually made this before. This is going to be my first attempt making this, but from my knowledge and from my understanding, it's a very simple dish to make. So for today's video, we're going to be making my version of shakshuka. The first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna create a tomato sauce. We're gonna start this dish up on the stovetop, and then we are going to finish this in the oven when it's ready to bake. So I do have this 5 to 6 inch cast iron skillet. This skillet would look amazing for the Instagram, but we're not gonna be using a cast iron pan. The acidity of the tomatoes can actually wear down the seasoning of your cast iron pan, so we're gonna stay away from that. We just don't wanna have to re-season the pan later on, and sometimes whatever's caked on, whatever seasoning you have, some of that flavor can actually leak into the dish, and that's not something we wanna use. So for this recipe, what I have right now, I do have this non-stick skillet. In order to actually fill this entire pan, we're gonna be making enough for multiple people, about 2 to 3 servings of shakshuka. So I'll be eating this for the next few days, which is fine by me. I do have some Roma tomatoes, and these are great for tomato sauces, really because they have a lot of flesh and not a lot of seeds. So these make really good tomatoes for sauces. But you know, if we're using fresh tomatoes, it's gonna take a bit longer to cook. It's not always the most convenient. So for this recipe, we are gonna be going with the canned tomatoes. These are heirloom tomatoes, they were on sale. It's what I had at my store. I got 3 different cans to show you the difference. So we've got the crushed tomatoes, the diced tomatoes, and then we've also got the whole tomatoes. The difference between the tomatoes, you might think might be negligible, but when you go with canned tomatoes, the most perfect tomatoes, the ones that look the best, the ones that are grown under ideal conditions, those are the ones they use in whole tomatoes. Now the odd bunch are the ones that are kind of funky, maybe the ones that have a couple more wrinkles and a couple more crinkles and dents and discolorations. Those are the ones that you typically find in the crushed tomatoes, and anything in between you're gonna get in the diced tomatoes, in the diced can. Anytime I use canned tomatoes, I typically go with the whole tomatoes. It's a little bit more work, not gonna lie, but I want to do whatever I can just to really maximize flavors. So whole tomatoes are the ones that we're going to be going with. Okay, we're going to be using a little bit of tomato paste as well, which is a tomato concentrate. And I've got a really great tip for you guys. It's just another technique just to help maximize flavors. We got an onion. I am using a Vidalia onion, and you can use whatever onion you have, but if you have the sweet onions, go for those ones instead, because the sweetness and the higher sugar content and the higher water content in these onions, they're gonna make it a bit more sweet, and the sweetness of the onion and as well as the bell pepper, they're gonna help mellow some of that sourness and that acidity that you sometimes get in tomato sauces, and hopefully we won't need to add anything else to really balance out that acidity. Finally, we've got a few spices. We've got cumin, we've got paprika, and then also we've got chili powder, and we're only going to be using a little bit of all of those in our preparation. Luckily at the grocery store, they did have a baby baguette, or a half baguette, or a demi baguette. Demi is for half in French. So my mom made me a little housewarming present. She made me a planter full of fresh herbs, and so I got some parsley, which we're gonna use for garnish. I do have some green onions, and I'm gonna throw these in as well. We're just gonna use the white parts in to cook, and then we're gonna use the tips, the green parts for the garnish later on. Again, this is gonna be a celebration of tomatoes and eggs, just with a few more ingredients just to liven up the dish a little bit more. So let's get started, guys. guys, let's do this. Okay, so when we are using canned tomatoes, and again, like I mentioned with the whole tomatoes, we gotta process them a little bit more. Typically with this dish, I would not be using a non-stick skillet. I'd be using something stainless steel. The coating of a non-stick skillet is a bit fragile. It's something you don't really want to mess around with too much because it can get toxic depending if you start to use metal and you start to scratch the surface, and also just loses its non-stick ability. Is that a word? I guess so. So what I would normally do is once you take these tomatoes, I'd use a potato masher and just like whack them around. Now you guys don't have to use whole tomatoes. If you want to make this a little bit easier, feel free to use crushed tomatoes or diced tomatoes. I would go for crushed if anything, because we do want this more saucy than chunky. Okay, so I have a mixing bowl. I'm just gonna dump both of these tomato cans into this mixing bowl. We're gonna take one, okay. So a really good trick when you are using a potato masher to mash these, if you just plunge the potato masher just straight down like that, and these are whole tomatoes, just imagine like squishing a water balloon. It might squirt all over you. So one thing I like to do is I take the end of it and I just kind of like poke around, break all of them, kind of like you're breaking an egg yolk, which is like faux pas to me. But once you do that, then go ahead and then go with the good old squishy magoo. That way it just prevents some of that. Okay, moving on. Our tomatoes ready to go. Next up, we're gonna be preparing our onion. So we're gonna take this onion and we're gonna do a medium dice to that. So first thing I do is I chop the top off. Anytime I do a sauce, I like to remove not just the paper, but also the first layer of the onion. Sometimes you never know, it's a little thin, and sometimes that can get rubbery, which is not what we want in this sauce, okay? So I take the paper layer and also the top layer off. I actually save this stuff, and I'll show you what I do with it. I've been saving all my scraps, the leftover pieces, and I put them in the freezer, which we're gonna use to make a stock, and that's gonna be my next video afterwards. So when you are dicing a onion, it's good to leave the root in. That just helps hold the onion together, helps it from falling apart. So when you are chopping it, it will hold together. Also, if you do keep the root in, it helps keep the juices in as well, which sometimes can cause like the tearing up and the crying. So if you guys look real closely, you see the root of the bulb? What I like to do is I like to chop off a little bit of the root, but not the entire thing, just to get some of the dirty dirt McGirt. I pretty much gave this onion a haircut. If you look at the cutting board, you're gonna see a whole bunch of dirt. I don't like cooking with dirt, you know what I'm saying? First cut in half. Now we're going to be doing our bell pepper. We're also going to be preparing this pepper in a way that we can actually save some of this, which goes back in our scraps bag, which is going to go into our stock. This bell pepper specifically, it's kind of got like, it almost looks like a recycling sign. Like it's kind of got like 3 little bulbs, 3 sections. The parts that are the closest to the center. So this part right here, this part right there, and this part right here, the parts that are closest to the center, that's where the ribs of the pepper are gonna be. And so we're gonna make an incision along that, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So we're taking a knife, find that spot there, and just shave around it, just like that. Okay, so we have our pepper like so, and then we have the inside part, the white part. You know, the white part is edible. We don't want the seeds, but we just want to make sure we have our pieces of pepper that we can work with. Red bell peppers are pretty mild in flavor. You can also use a green bell pepper or yellow bell pepper. But remember, tomatoes are the star of the dish, along with the eggs. When we are eating with our eyes as well too. So we don't want to take too much away from the color of the tomato sauce, so we do want to keep it with a red bell pepper. Okay, so one more cut. Voila, so we got this. We've got our pepper de-seeded. It's all hanging right here. And this whole thing goes inside there, done. Seal them up, ready to go. We're gonna save this for our vegetable stock. I'm gonna chop off the tops here, like that, and also the bottom, so we can have like a flat sheet of pepper. And we're not gonna throw those away, we're using them, but it's just easier to process this way. Again, back to medium diced, the same thickness as our onion. So I like to put the pepper skin side down away from your knife, because the skin of the pepper, just like a tomato, if you have an opportunity to cut through the inside, it's a bit weaker, right? If this bell pepper is growing out in the bush, growing out in the field there, the outside, the skin is like its natural protectant. It's a little tougher, it's more resilient, so it's a bit easier to cut through the inside, which is particularly helpful if you don't have the sharpest knife in the world, okay? So we make these little sticks. So this is what it looks like. And then we're gonna make that into the dice. Okay. I realized with this whole filmmaking process, I'm not really good at writing scripts. I'm actually quite terrible. That's like my biggest weakness. So I'm going to do more of the off-the-cuff style recipes and like cooking, because that's where I feel more comfortable and I feel like it's more natural. Like if I start reading off like a teleprompter, or at least, I mean, I'll definitely get my ideas out there, but it's not something that I'm too good with. So. Now you don't have to use the green onions, but they are one of my favorite ingredients, these scallions. We're gonna separate the bottoms from the tops. So I like to go right where it starts to change from light green down to like dark forest green. This is more about the garnish up top, but since we have this, we're gonna use it anyways. We're just gonna cube these up into a little same size as these peppers, and then I'm just gonna throw them in these peppers as well. So with our green onions, our garnish, we are going to do this real thin, and we're gonna do this at an angle. So I'm gonna take my green onions and cut them at about a 45-degree bias. When you're garnishing with green onions, it just looks a bit nicer if you do it at the 45-degree angle. So yeah, check it out, right? Little diamonds. So we're gonna get started. We're gonna get the skillet going. We are gonna get this onto the cooktop. We've moved over to the stove, and first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna set our oven to 375 start. We are also gonna be turning our cooktop onto a high heat. We do wanna get some caramelization. We do wanna get some color. Bring out some of the sweetness in this onions, and then we're gonna move it to our peppers, add the spices, and then we're going to be adding our tomato paste. So once we get the onions into the pan, we're gonna add a bit of salt. This is good for seasoning, but more importantly, the salt draws some of the moisture out of the onions, which aids in the caramelization process. Now we're gonna let the onions saute for about 3 minutes. Next, we're gonna add our bell pepper and the bottoms of the scallions, and together with the onions, we're gonna saute that for a few more minutes. Once the onions start to go translucent, we're gonna add our spices. We're gonna add 1 teaspoon of paprika, 1 teaspoon of chili powder, and then 1 teaspoon of ground cumin. Finally, just give it a stir. Try to get those spices to cover everything in the pan. It's important to add the spices at this point of the cooking process because the spices will infuse in the oil, which will help distribute those flavors a lot better than it does when you add it after the wet ingredients. Now is the time that we are putting our tomato paste in. So tomato paste is basically mashed up into this really like concentrated, really deep tomato flavor. So we're gonna use about a tablespoon of tomato paste. Now when we cook out tomato paste, it's kind of like what we do when we caramelize onions. It brings out flavors that you never thought were possible. We just let it caramelize a little bit, turn down the heat just a tad, and really try to get as much of the tomato paste onto the surface of the pan so we really get some caramelization, which adds a whole ton of flavor. It's just gonna add more of a tomato dimension to the crushed tomatoes that we have on standby. Okay. When you caramelize onions, it's very similar. It's going to change color. So we're going to notice a color change in this tomato sauce. Okay. So we got our spices, we got our tomato sauce, our pepper, our onions, and it's just, oh, I know this is going to be good. Part of me is a little bit nervous because I've never made this, but it's just like technique. We dice our tomatoes, our vegetables, we're sauteing. We learned some cool new tips with when to add our spices and when to add our tomato paste. If you're able to learn new techniques, pick up a thing here or two just to really extract more flavor out of our vegetables, then let's do that. Let's make vegetables awesome. Let's really find ways to like grow together and really learn how just to make these dishes really, really tasty. Okay? Oh, that smells really good. Yeah, that smells really good. The tomato paste has been cooking for about 2.5 to 3 minutes already, and we can really see the change in color. We can hear the crackling. It's kind of like a campfire. That's creating flavor right now. Now that the tomato paste has been cooked out, it's gone from a bright red, and it's kind of dulled out, kind of mellowed out, and it's a bit deeper in color now. So it's more of like a darker maroon, if you will. That's a good way to tell when you've done a little bit of cooking out of your tomato paste, okay? Yes, yes, we're getting some color, which is real good. Now it's time to add our tomatoes. And when we're pour away from your body so no splatter of hot oil at the bottom. Okay, tomatoes are in. Now stir everything around. Now we just gotta let this come back up to temperature. And then once we're at temperature, we're good. We're almost there. That's pretty much it. As the tomato sauce simmers and it comes back up to temperature, let's give it a taste, check for seasoning. We did season the onions earlier. At this point, I do need a little bit more salt. Add a little bit of fresh ground pepper as well. Our sauce has been stewing for about 10 minutes. I'm just gonna give this a little taste. Okay, get some onion, get a little bit of pepper in there. I'm impressed with myself, not gonna lie. This is so good. So our sauce is just about right. I think I wanna add just a little bit more salt. You know, it's always good to check your seasoning as you go. You don't wanna, once you over salt it, that's pretty much it. We got the peppers, the onions, and they're kind of like all diced up, all sitting in this pool of tomato sauce. We got those chunks that we broke down of those whole peeled heirloom tomatoes. Now what we're gonna do, we're gonna take our eggs and we're gonna create little wells inside this sauce. And that's why this chunky sauce is gonna be good. We got 7 eggs going inside this. Oh, I can't wait for this. We wanna make sure the yolks don't pop. So I'm actually gonna be using one of these containers. So I'm gonna actually crack the egg inside here. Just an extra measure, you don't need to do this, but for presentation purposes, I am going to do that. So I'm gonna take my spoon, push it away from me, use this wooden spoon kind of like as a backboard, and to throw that egg right inside. Woo, perfect. 1 egg down, okay? Next one. Boom! We've got our eggs sitting in their nice little tomato wells. They're gonna get nice and poached inside the tomato sauce, and we're gonna throw this into the oven, which was set to 375 degrees. We're gonna turn the light on, we're gonna watch it, we're gonna monitor until those eggs just turn completely translucent, and we're gonna have that runny yolk. In the meantime, we do have our garnish of our green onions. Take the parsley, bunch it all up. We're gonna rough chop it. And give it a little 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, bang, boom, done. Okay. What am I doing? I'm figuring this channel out as we go. It's a learning experience. We're gonna have fun. We're having fun, okay? Garnish, ready to go. One more thing we gotta do is the baguette. Cut them up into really thin slices, and that's gonna be the vessel that we use to dip into that egg yolk, to soak up all that tomato sauce, and just bring it all together in a way to enjoy this shakshuka. Shakshuka! Shakshuka, shakshuka. Okay, so here are our slices. It looks pretty good to me. Okay, the eggs are just about done. I have this can of tomato paste. Just wanna show you how I store this. This is a very common problem that we have when we use these tomato paste cans. Typically use a lot less than they have inside here. If I'm gonna be using this anytime soon, I will put this in the fridge. I flatten the surface as much as possible. Then I take a bit of saran wrap, okay? Push the saran wrap all the way to the surface of the tomato paste, just to really create a seal so that the surface of this tomato paste does not make contact with any air, because that will just cause oxidation and that will just cause it to go bad a lot faster. So we can just get a few more days using a little method like this. Anytime you make a sauce, this trick is actually really good with guacamole as well. If you're making guac ahead of time, we all know avocados go brown, right? Avocados go brown over time. So, and then final step, give it a little ring around the rosy, just like that. Okay, perfect. The saran wrap just kind of goes like down, in, and up. Yeah, perfect, good. This looks fantastic. The deep red of the tomato sauce, eggs are poached perfectly. The yolk still has its deep yellow color. It's a bit translucent, so we know it's gonna be nice and runny. It's not light, it's not overcooked. If you wanna hit it with some pepper, you wanna hit it with some salt, I think it's just time to garnish now, and we're gonna do a little photo shoot. So, okay, hit it with the parsley, some of the green onions. Oh, this is gonna be good. So let's do a little bit of pep. Okay, everybody, we are all wrapped up for this evening. Finished up the shakshuka. I just spent about 10 hours styling the dish. This is how I'm going to serve. I'm gonna take a little bit of the sauce, layer it on the bottom, like so. Oh, look at that. Then take one of these eggs, put that on top, and my little toasted baguette. So this is pretty much how I would serve it. Oh my gosh, this is so fun. Mmm. You guys, the tomato sauce is so nice. The onions and the peppers, they've just got such a delicate texture. The spices that we used in there, the cumin, the paprika, and the chili peppers, they are so subtle, but you know that they're there. It's not overpowering because this is a tomato sauce with a little bit more flavor, a little bit more kick, and that is so incredible. And when you get some of that egg smothered in that tomato sauce, oh, it just brings everything home, and it just got that real nice warm bite that you're looking for. Something you'd find in a brunch dish. But thank you everybody for tuning in, and I hope to see all of you guys in the next video. Thanks guys.